In 2018, a relatively obscure republic tucked deep within Central Asia unveiled what seemed to be an ingenious plan to curb the mass exodus of skilled and educated professionals, a predicament plaguing many developing nations globally. The solution, stark in its simplicity, was to prohibit nearly all citizens from leaving the country. This transformed Turkmenistan, a landlocked nation twice the size of the United Kingdom, into a de facto prison. Turkmenistan often touts itself as a country of pragmatic solutions. That same year, then-President Gurbanguly Berdimuhamedow attributed bad fortune to black cars, promptly banning their importation. Overnight, citizens discovered their vehicles towed away, only to reclaim them after an enforced repaint, often at unaffordable costs. Eventually, the prohibition extended to all colors, leaving a monochrome fleet of white vehicles, a reflection of the president's favorite hue. Satellite images of Turkmenistan now showcase a stark, white sea of automobiles. Yet Berdimuhamedow's peculiarities pale compared to his predecessor, Saparmurat Niyazov. Declaring himself, His Excellency, great leader of the Turkmen, and God's prophet on earth, Niyazov embarked on increasingly grandiose initiatives. One included carving a 37-kilometer health staircase into the Kopet Dag Mountains. He mandated annual health walks for government officials, observing from a helicopter and publicly berating them for their pace at the summit. The eccentric mandates didn't stop there. Niyazov personally renamed days, months, horse breeds, and even lunar craters to suit his whims. He once renamed bread after his mother. In another bizarre decree, he advised citizens to chew bones for dental health, reasoning that dogs never visit dentists. Dogs, however, became rare in the capital after their banishment for their unpleasant odor. Such peculiarities extended to Turkmenistan's capital, Ashgabat. Over 3 decades, vast neighborhoods were razed to make way for an immaculate urban vision of dictatorship. A city adorned with Italian marble, gilded monuments, and grandiose structures. These efforts earned Ashgabat several Guinness World Records, including the largest indoor Ferris wheel and the highest concentration of marble buildings. The irony of this lavishness lies in the nation's crippling water shortages and pervasive poverty. But beneath its gleaming facade, life in Turkmenistan remains bleak for its citizens. In August 2023, in Lebap province's searing cotton fields, tens of thousands labored under 104 degrees Fahrenheit heat. Unlike typical agricultural workers, this workforce included teachers, doctors, lawyers, and schoolchildren, forced into the fields without pay under a presidential mandate. The threat of job loss or public humiliation compelled compliance in a country with 70% unemployment. This dystopian reality starkly contrasts the image of prosperity presented by its rulers. Since breaking away from the Soviet Union, Turkmenistan's leadership has meticulously reimposed Stalinist control. Secret police employed torture and psychotropic drugs to suppress dissent. Enemies of the state endured televised public confessions before disappearing. Even minor criticisms can result in imprisonment, exile, or confinement to remote salt flats. In 2023, Turkmenistan ranked second worst globally for freedom, trailing only North Korea. Hopes for reform dwindled in 2022 when Gurbanguly Berdimuhamedow passed power to his son, Serdar, a dynastic succession unprecedented since Central Asia's Khanates. Turkmenistan's trajectory, from its Soviet roots to its modern authoritarian dystopia, raises critical questions. How did this descent into despotism occur? What sustains the regime's iron grip on power? And where does the wealth sustaining this repressive apparatus originate? To understand, we turn to history. In September 1879, Russian forces bombarded the fortress city of Gyaktepe. Enclosed by thick mud walls and sheltering 40,000 Turkmen, the city withstood a fierce assault, forcing a Russian retreat. This defeat marked Russia's first significant setback in Central Asia, where it sought to expand its empire. Determined to prevail, Russia returned in 1881 with a calculated strategy. Dynamiting a breach in the city's defenses, Russian troops poured in, massacring residents. With Jiak Tepe's fall, resistance crumbled, and Central Asia succumbed to imperial domination. Yet Russia made minimal effort to integrate the region, whose harsh desert terrain hindered development. By World War I, Turkmenistan's industrial landscape was sparse. Amid the Russian Revolution, Central Asia descended into chaos until the Soviet Union consolidated power in 1924. The newly created Turkmen Soviet Socialist Republic underwent sweeping reforms. Nomadic populations were settled, lands collectivized, and Soviet ideals instilled through education. Turkmenistan's economy was regionalized within the Soviet framework, specializing in natural gas, cotton, and sheep production. However, its vast deserts and sparse population hindered industrial growth, leaving it underdeveloped by the USSR's collapse in 1991. Despite abundant natural resources, independence posed challenges requiring strategic leadership. Enter Saparmurat Niyazov. Rising from Soviet bureaucracy, Niyazov cemented absolute power post-independence. Initially promising economic reform, he instead forged a surreal cult of personality. Under his rule, grand marble edifices proliferated, while citizens grappled with poverty, power shortages, and repression. Niyazov's death in 2006 passed the mantle to Gurbanguly Berdimuhamedow, whose early pragmatism soon gave way to his own cult of personality. Extravagant projects persisted, overshadowing pressing societal needs. Forced labor, censorship, and authoritarian policies flourished. Today, Turkmenistan's leaders continue to exploit its vast natural gas reserves to sustain their regime. Yet for its people, the nation remains a gilded cage, its wealth visible but inaccessible, its history of repression as enduring as its marble monuments. Opposition to the hereditary transition of power to Gurbanguly Berdimuhamedow's son, Serdar, in 2022 underscored the regime's unyielding grip. This further entrenched autocratic governance, leaving little room for hope among the populace. Turkmenistan remains one of the most repressive and isolated countries globally, its path to a more open and prosperous future shrouded in uncertainty. The regime's relentless focus on consolidating power and exploiting natural resources continues to shape the nation's trajectory. In the aftermath of the Soviet Union's collapse, Turkmenistan faced a severe economic crisis. The nation's economic output dwindled to less than half of its 1991 level. At the core of the crisis was a mismatch between political independence and economic autonomy, a legacy of the Soviet policy of regionalization. Lacking the capability to refine its resources or infrastructure to export goods beyond Russia, Turkmenistan was economically isolated. This isolation was starkly visible in the lack of even a railway link to neighboring Iran, despite Ashgabat lying a mere 15 miles from the Iranian border. Consequently, Turkmenistan's gas and cotton could only be transported, sold, and processed through Russia. Exploiting this dependency, Russia purchased Turkmen commodities at significantly reduced prices, paying in hard currency for only half their already devalued worth. The remainder was often compensated with goods, such as grain, or not paid at all. Russia's state-owned energy giant, Gazprom, further limited its purchases to 11 billion cubic meters annually, a mere eighth of Turkmenistan's pre-independence gas production levels. In 1997, the situation worsened as former Soviet republics, grappling with financial instability, halted gas payments entirely. Confronted with unpaid dues amounting to 80% of its GDP, Turkmenistan ceased gas exports altogether. By this time, gas exports stood at just 10% of pre-independence levels. Cotton production also suffered, declining by 50% due to a lack of hard currency to import essential supplies such as fertilizers, tractors, and harvesting machinery. These challenges were compounded by Niyazov's policy of providing free water to citizens and farmers, which removed incentives for efficient use. Severe water shortages ensued, and agricultural output per acre dropped by 43% over 7 years. With its primary industries in disarray, living standards plummeted, threatening the regime's stability. The solution, though straightforward, was ambitious. Turkmenistan needed to bypass Russia's economic stranglehold by accessing global markets through alternative gas pipelines and railways. In 1996, the first rail connection to Iran was established, opening access to the Persian Gulf. The following year, a modest pipeline connected Turkmenistan's gas fields to Iran's remote northeast, with a capacity of 4 billion cubic meters annually, though exports rarely reached even a third of this due to Iran's financial constraints. A more ambitious proposal emerged: a pipeline spanning over 1,000 miles to transport 33 billion cubic meters of gas to Pakistan and India. However, the route through Taliban-controlled Afghanistan rendered the project unfeasible. Another promising initiative was the Trans-Caspian Pipeline, which aimed to transport gas beneath the Caspian Sea through Azerbaijan and Georgia to Turkey and Western Europe. Yet, maritime disputes with Iran and unresolved negotiations over transit fees indefinitely postponed the project. Despite these setbacks, diplomatic engagements yielded some benefits. Notably, a meeting between Niyazov and U.S. President Bill Clinton focused on strategies to access global markets without reliance on Iran or Russia. Though the proposed projects failed to materialize, the mere threat of diversification compelled Russia to sign a more favorable gas agreement with Turkmenistan. As a result, gas exports to Russia surged, transforming the nation's trade deficit into a surplus by 2000. This economic recovery spurred the construction of modern textile factories, repurposing farmland for domestic food production, and the renovation of a Soviet-era oil refinery. Collectively, these efforts fueled an economic boom, positioning Turkmenistan as one of the fastest-growing economies globally. However, this newfound wealth was channeled not into improving citizens' lives but into realizing Niyazov's extravagant vision. On December 28, 1999, a newly elected parliament, composed entirely of Niyazov's hand-picked candidates, granted him the title of president for life. Freed from even the pretense of fair elections, Niyazov fully embraced his delusions of grandeur. Declaring himself the spiritual and cultural arbiter of the Turkmen nation, he banned ballets, operas, beards, and cinemas for being insufficiently Turkmen. Schools offering foreign language education were shuttered, and state employees had to prove Turkmen racial purity traceable 3 generations, prompting a mass exodus of skilled Russians. A personal health scare led Niyazov to ban public smoking and construct the infamous 37-kilometer Walk of Health, mandating annual participation. In 2001, he authored the Ruhnama, a pseudo-national Bible glorifying Turkmen nationalism and depicting Niyazov as a godlike savior. The book became ubiquitous, occupying shelves, mosques, and schools, where it was the centerpiece of the curriculum. Swearing an oath on the Ruhnama was mandatory for prisoners seeking release, and criticism of the book could result in imprisonment. The Ruhnama also became a tool for propaganda. A copy was even launched into orbit, symbolizing its supposed universal significance. Across Turkmenistan, Niyazov's image was omnipresent, adorning public spaces, currency, and even transportation interiors. His most extravagant project was transforming Ashgabat into a marble-clad testament to his power, featuring golden statues, lavish monuments, and luxury palaces, all while much of the population languished in poverty. On November 25, 2002, an attempted assassination on Niyazov's motorcade marked a turning point. The failed coup prompted a brutal crackdown, with hundreds subjected to show trials and disappearing without a trace. Surveillance intensified, informants proliferated, and public gatherings required government approval. Roadblocks became commonplace, and restrictions on travel, especially for women, tightened further. Despite the growing paranoia and repression, Niyazov's regime continued executing grandiose projects. These included the Turkmenbashi Palace, a $1.4 billion marble edifice, and the Golden Age Lake, an artificial desert reservoir intended to revolutionize agriculture. Yet, these initiatives did little to alleviate the struggles of ordinary citizens. On December 21, 2006, after 2 decades of unchallenged rule, Niyazov died of a heart attack, leaving behind a nation deeply scarred by his authoritarian legacy and opulent excess. Following Niyazov's death, Turkmenistan faced a critical juncture. The immediate concern was the power vacuum created by the departure of a ruler who had dominated every facet of the nation for 2 decades. Despite this, the transition was swift, orchestrated to ensure continuity of the regime. Gurbanguly Berdimuhamedow, Niyazov's deputy prime minister and minister of health, was quickly positioned as the successor. He was officially declared president after a tightly controlled election in February 2007, where opposition was effectively non-existent. Berdimuhamedow initially presented himself as a reformer, promising to address some of the excesses of Niyazov's rule. He reversed a few of the more bizarre policies, such as renaming days of the week and months after Niyazov and his family. The Runama was de-emphasized, though it retained a lingering presence in public life. Berdimuhamedow also made efforts to engage more with the international community, seeking foreign investment and improving Turkmenistan's relations with neighboring countries. Despite these gestures, the core structure of autocratic rule remained intact. Berdimuhamedow maintained strict control over the political landscape, stifling dissent, and perpetuating a pervasive cult of personality, this time centered around himself. His image began to dominate public spaces, and state media lavished praise on his supposed wisdom and achievements. Even as Turkmenistan attempted to project a modernized image abroad, internally, little changed for the average citizen. Economically, Turkmenistan remained heavily reliant on its vast natural gas reserves, one of the largest in the world. While the government made some attempts to diversify, gas exports continued to account for the majority of revenue. The construction of new pipelines, such as the Turkmenistan-China gas pipeline inaugurated in 2009, reduced the country's dependency on Russian routes. However, this created a new dependency on China, which became the dominant buyer of Turkmen gas, dictating terms favorable to Beijing. Despite periodic economic booms fueled by high gas prices, the lack of substantial reforms and over-reliance on hydrocarbons made the economy vulnerable to fluctuations in global energy markets. When gas prices plummeted in the mid-2010s, Turkmenistan's economy suffered, exposing the fragility of its heavily centralized and mismanaged system. For ordinary Turkmens, the promises of reform brought little relief. Unemployment remained high, and the free provisions of gas, water, and electricity, long a tool to placate the populace, were gradually reduced under Berdimuhamedow. Food shortages became common, exacerbated by government mismanagement and corruption. The rural population, in particular, bore the brunt of these challenges, with many relying on subsistence farming to survive. Migration surged as Turkmens sought better opportunities abroad. However, the government imposed strict controls on travel, especially for young women and professionals, fearing a brain drain. Those caught trying to leave without proper authorization faced harassment or imprisonment. On the international stage, Turkmenistan continued its policy of permanent neutrality, a status recognized by the United Nations in 1995. This neutrality allowed the regime to avoid entanglements in regional conflicts while maintaining relationships with diverse partners, from China and Russia to the United States and Iran. However, this isolationist stance also limited Turkmenistan's ability to attract meaningful foreign investment beyond the energy sector. While Berdimuhamedow sought to diversify trade and build infrastructure, such efforts were often undermined by corruption and inefficiency. By the late 2010s, Berdimuhamedow's health became a subject of speculation, fueling rumors about succession plans. In 2022, he announced his decision to step aside, paving the way for his son, Serdar Berdimuhamedow, to assume the presidency. The transition was choreographed to ensure stability, with Serdar winning an election widely regarded as a mere formality. The hereditary transfer of power reinforced the regime's dynastic ambitions, signaling little hope for democratic reform. While Serdar has made statements about modernizing the economy and improving governance, early signs suggest he is continuing the policies of his father and grandfather, prioritizing regime stability over meaningful change. As Turkmenistan enters its fourth decade of independence, it remains one of the most isolated and authoritarian nations in the world. The government's focus on maintaining power, coupled with its failure to address economic and social challenges, has left the population with little hope for a brighter future. Despite its vast natural resources, the country's potential remains unrealized, constrained by the weight of its authoritarian legacy. Whether Serdar's presidency marks the beginning of a new chapter or merely a continuation of the past remains uncertain, but the challenges facing Turkmenistan are as formidable as ever. Thank you for watching.